Okay, I think we're probably ready to get started. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Welcome to this webinar, which is today on the last resort requirement under REACH, from principle to practice, which is the title of a publication that was put out just before Christmas, or just after Christmas, or just before the new year in 2023. We've got a really exciting agenda for you today. We have some of the authors of this paper with us today. Firstly, we're just going to kick things off doing some housekeeping and telling you a little bit about the Animal Free Safety Assessment collaboration who put this publication out, giving you a little bit more information about who we are and what we do. And then I will pass over to Carl, who will give us an introduction on the publication itself, what the thrust of it was and the aims and everything like that. And then we will dive into some case studies that we have explored within the publication. And James and Xiaoling will help us with those. And then hopefully at the end, we will have some time for Q&A. And yeah, we can have a lively discussion, hopefully, about the paper, about some of the case studies, and whatever else you need to ask. So, just to get things started and to introduce myself, my name is Jay Ingram. I'm the Director of Chemicals here at Humane Society International. Yeah, Humane Society International is a large part of AFSA. And we really work together with all of our collaborators to help push forward science-supported policy changes. We're going to be, as I say, talking about our last resort paper, just a bit of housekeeping. We will primarily be fielding questions through the Q&A function of Teams. The chat function is open, but we won't readily monitor it. So if you ask a question in the chat function, it might not be picked up and it might not be answered. So please do use the Q&A function as much as possible. We are aware that some people who may be joining on the web version of Teams might not have access to the Q&A function. If that is, pop your question in the chat and hopefully we can pick it up. But if you do have access to the Q&A function, please do use that, because that will be the primary means of us answering your questions. Also, this webinar will be recorded, and we will be hosting that on our sites, and you'll be able to access that after the webinar, should you so choose. So now that we've got the housekeeping out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about AFSA, in case you're unfamiliar with who we are and what we do. The fundamentals of AFSA, really, we are aiming to accelerate regulatory adoption of non-animal approaches. We utilize science to support policy changes, and we kind of operate on both sides of this coin here, where we leverage scientific evidence and we use that and put that towards driving regulatory change. We do that by using practical solutions, by building capacity and capability, and we also have a global vision and a global scope. Today, obviously, we're focusing primarily on the European Union, but we have activities all around the world in many different countries, as you'll see on this next slide. So in terms of our role and our impact, we're really the only global multi-stakeholder collaboration in the regulatory testing landscape that leverages political advocacy as well as science and education to drive change. We have really played a large role in seeing federal cosmetic animal testing bans come about in Mexico, Brazil, Canada, and Chile. We've also been involved in promoting sales bans in 11 US states, and also done a lot of work in cultivating stakeholder engagement in the ASEAN and South Africa regions. We've been also, as a collaboration, instrumental in the deletion or waiver of obsolete animal tests for biologicals. We've been successful in this area in Argentina, Brazil, India, Japan, Russia, South Korea, and Thailand. And so these have been really exciting and incredible wins that have been driven really through excellent collaboration with all of our partners, and this willingness and this drive to leverage not just science, but also the policy and regulatory transformation sides of things. We've also had a really intensive collaboration that's led to the AFSA Masterclass in Animal-Free Safety Assessment. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as well. Some of you may already be aware of this. This is a really excellent resource. It is a state-of-the-art master's level educational tool that really helps to build capacity and capability and cultivate understanding of non-animal methods and animal-free safety assessment, and how to bring all of this together, to make sure that what we are doing and promoting helps to benefit human and environmental health, as well as animal welfare. And lastly, what we're here to talk about today, we have our last resort publication. And we have numerous other projects that are looking at targeted tools for regulatory accountability and just making sure that the rules are being followed as they're laid out, and that the best science is also being considered when making regulatory decisions. So this is just a bit of a whistle-stop tour of who we are and what we do. We have a number of different collaborators across a few different work streams, and this slide just really gives you an insight into a few of our collaborators that have joined us last year. And three of these companies are represented on the call. We have representatives from Unilever, Innospec, and P&G today. AFSA is split into three separate work streams. We have chemicals and consumer products, which is the work stream that the last resort paper has come out of. We have the biologicals work stream, which we mentioned already with the deletion and waiver of specific animal tests. And we also have the cosmetics work stream, which pushed for animal testing bans for cosmetics. And it's also the work stream that gave us our very exciting AFSA Masterclass. We will be sunsetting a lot of our work on cosmetics, but wrapping that up into what we're doing in chemicals, and having chemicals and consumer products be a focus, as these two sort of elements are so intrinsically linked. And we're aiming to make a lot of regulatory change in the chemical space very soon. Just before we get started on the contents of the webinar, I wanted to quickly mention the masterclass because it's such an exceptional tool, and we're really very proud of it as a collaboration. So what we've done is taken the complete animal-free risk assessment process and divided it into 8 modules, which you can see here, for content development, and the course is based on the ICCR principles and the tiered workflow, and is structured around specific learning objectives. We also have included a module on the global regulatory environment, which helps to understand how animal testing relates to particular regulatory frameworks with a focus on cosmetics and chemicals. So if you haven't already taken the opportunity to have a go with some of the modules, it's entirely free, and it can all be found online here at afsacollaboration.org/masterclass. And you can this is self-led learning, so you can do it in your own time. As I said, it's totally free and really gives a great overview of the broad concepts surrounding animal-free safety assessment. So now that I've done my shameless plug, it's time to meet our speakers who will be taking us through the rest of the webinar today. We will start with Dr. Carl Westmoreland, who will give us an overview of the last resort paper, moving on to Jay Dawick from Innospec, and lastly, Dr. Zhang will wrap us all up before we head into our Q&A session. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Carl. Please, Carl, go ahead and you start sharing your slides, switch your camera on, and let us know you're here.
I'm here, Jay. Thank you very much. I've shared my slides. Are they there?
Yes. take it away.
Weirdly, I can't see them, but anyway. So why can't I see the slides anymore? I'll just do it again, sorry. Right, that's better. Thank you very much. You can see them now, Perfect. Can you?
Yeah,
right.
Great.
Thanks ever so much for the background, Jay. So as Jay says, I'm Carl Westmoreland from Unilever, and I'm just going to do a very quick 5 minutes introduction as to the work that led to the publication that Jay mentioned. And this is the publication, The Last Resort Requirement under REACH from Principle to Practice, that we worked on for a couple of years and led to this publication in Regulatory Tox and Pharmacology. So the reference is there on the screen, and it will pop up quite a lot during the next hour. So hopefully you'll get a chance to have a read if you haven't done already. And as Jay said, we're very interested in any feedback you have. So just as the background as to why this work was undertaken by AFSA, relating to the protection of animal welfare legislation under EU law, which starts at a very high level in Article 13 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU, which gives a very prominent position to the role of animal welfare and the consideration of sentience in animals being part of implementing any EU legislation. And then that's then key in the secondary legislation, the Directive 2010/63, the EU Directive on the Protection of Animals for Scientific Purposes. Once again, this clearly states that whenever possible, a scientific satisfactory testing strategy that doesn't involve animal testing on live animals should be used. So that's the kind of the legal constructs in the EU that enshrine that animal welfare within the legislation. And then that's also taken through into REACH, into Article 25 of EU REACH, that clearly addresses this and is consistent with the two pieces of previous legislation that I talked about. It states that in order to avoid animal testing, testing on vertebrate animals for the purposes of REACH should only be undertaken as a last resort. And it's that last resort that's the last resort that's mentioned in the title of the paper and that we explored through the work that led to it. Just also put there a reference from the ECJ, the European Court of Justice ruling in 2020, which kind of builds on the last resort a little further, saying that the registrant not simply has the possibility, but has the obligation to generate information obtained by means other than an intact animal whenever possible, to demonstrate that animal testing is always a last resort within REACH. So that was the context of the work that we did within the AFSA collaboration. We're not going to go through the entirety of the paper, but what it did was to explore several examples, and examples in the paper are all published and referenced so that you can look back at them and reflect on them yourselves. But there were sort of six kind of areas that we looked at around exploring examples where animal testing had been suggested or was present within REACH, where maybe it was not as a last resort. And the six areas that we looked at were the non-acceptance of existing animal or non-animal data, the non-acceptance of read-across information, the administrative processes that may be resulting in animal testing not being a last resort, redundancy in testing, testing when there are actually animal welfare concerns about the conduct of that testing, and testing when an ingredient is only present in cosmetics. So those were the six areas that the examples in the paper explored. Many of the examples explore more than one of those areas. And as I say, we're not going to go through all of them. But the paper takes us through each of those examples and looks at the evidence around them. And then the conclusions of the paper end up with recommendations for governance and enforcement of the last resort. How can we strengthen the adherence to the last resort requirement? And I think the key point here is everybody in the process has a responsibility for this one. The Commission, the European Chemicals Agency, and the registrants submitting data and approaches within REACH all have an obligation and to ensure that animal testing is a last resort, and that is really what the recommendations of the paper look at. How can that governance and enforcement get potentially stronger, building on what we found through the examples explored in the paper? So hopefully that gives you in a nutshell what the paper was about, what it addressed, and what the summaries were, and has enticed some of you to maybe go and have a read if you haven't done yet. But I'm sure the next two speakers will do even more than that. So I'll hand over to Jay Dawick from Innospec, who will talk through the first of the examples.
Thanks very much, Carl. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see screen. It's coming through okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. Perfect. So yeah, just to obviously extend the welcome that's already been given to you all by Jay and Carl. It's great to have you all on board today. The talk I'm going to take you through over the next 10 or 15 minutes is a case study from the last resort paper that we, Innospec, contributed to. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jay Dawick. I'm Senior Toxicology and Risk Assessment Manager at Innospec. And yeah, the case study that I'm going to be covering over the next 10 or 15 minutes is on an exclusive use cosmetic ingredient, and it concerns the chronic fish toxicity endpoint information requirements under REACH and what we did to uphold the last resort principle on this particular issue. So over the next 10-15 minutes, I'll briefly kick off with an introduction to Innospec, who we are, what we do, company profile. I'll go into the ingredient itself, so some of the background, the history of its use, the background of the compliance check received from the European Chemicals Agency on it. For those of you that are maybe not so familiar with the chronic fish or fish early life stage toxicity test, I've got one slide giving some background on that. Then I go into the challenges that we actually had with this particular endpoint, the strategy that we developed at Innospec and the proposal we made to the other registrants in the consortium, the outcome of everything that happened, and then I'll finish up with some concluding thoughts. And then yeah, later on in the webinar, happy to take any questions from any of the participants. So very quick introduction to Innospec, who we are. So Innospec Incorporated is a US NASDAQ listed company. We're quite a large company. We routinely turn over around $2 billion in sales from our three core business units, which concerns performance chemicals, fuel specialties, and oil field services. There's around about 2,000 staff working for the company at the moment across 23 different countries globally. You can see on the map there, most of our manufacturing, technology, and R&D centers are located in US, UK, and Europe, but we have sales and regional offices dotted all around the world. And yeah, our focus and emphasis here at Innospec, I mean, for those of you that don't know, Innospec stands for Innovative Specialty Chemicals. So we're a technology-driven, R&D-driven organization, and we play a lot around with surface science chemicals. So that's just the company I work for in a nutshell. So into the case study itself and the ingredients. So the ingredients in question today it goes by the inky name C12-15 alkyl benzoate. The full chemical name is given there on the right-hand side, so benzoic acid, C12-15 alkyl esters. This particular substance was invented by Innospec, or rather a company that we acquired many decades ago. So it's protected by patents and whatnot, but those patents have long since lapsed. Yeah, it's a reaction product. It's a complex UVCB reaction product of C12-15 aliphatic alcohols and benzoic acid. It's used exclusively in cosmetics, which is quite important in the context of obviously today's webinar, given the disparity that we have between EU REACH and the cosmetic product regulation. As an exclusive use cosmetic ingredient, it's used in APDO or antiperspirant deodorants, lotions, moisturizers, and sunscreens, so a whole range of different products. It has a very long-standing safety profile and history of safe use, extensive global use inventory coverage for this ingredient. And yeah, the context of today's webinar, which is all around REACH and challenges with REACH. This was registered by Innospec in 2010 under Annex 10, so greater than 1,000 tons manufactured or imported into Europe. And up until 2020, so 10 years after the initial registration, Innospec was the lead registrant for this particular substance. So 7 years after registering in 2010, we received, as many companies that have got substances registered under REACH are no doubt familiar with it over the last few years, a dossier compliance check draft decision on this particular ingredient. The compliance check actually came in a year before I started working for Innospec. So as I joined the company, I had to get up to speed with everything that was going on with this and multiple other compliance checks, but I won't complain about that too much. It's kept me extremely busy over the last few years. But yeah, for this particular compliance check, you know, the story here is probably the same for those that are experienced in receiving compliance checks from ECHA on dossiers where read across has been relied on, or old tests existing within the dossier. So when ECHA reviewed the dossier, they judged a lot of the endpoints to be non-compliant. So some of the studies were not conforming fully to OECD test guideline methods. Read across that was used extensively in this dossier had been rejected, not substantiated well enough, and yeah, some of the waivers that we had in place for higher tier tox and ecotox studies had also been rejected. And as a result of that, you know, ECHA were somewhat requesting performance of a whole suite of new studies. And I want to draw attention to today is obviously this is a snapshot from the ECHA decision. There's a QR code there, so you can scan that with your phone, and that will take you directly to the compliance check decision on the ECHA website if you want to read it in detail. But yeah, that's what we're dealing with today, the long-term fish toxicity test that was requested by ECHA. So like I mentioned earlier, for those of you that are not familiar with chronic fish toxicity testing, the standard test for this endpoint under REACH is the OECD 210 fish ELS or fish early life stage test. This test was introduced around about 30 years ago as an alternative to what's called the FFLC or fish full life cycle test. So much more in-depth and much more extensive use of vertebrates in the FFLC. So the FELS itself is the primary test for estimating chronic long-term toxicity to fish, not just under REACH, but under other regulations, regulatory schemes around the world. It's used to support environmental risk assessment, decision-making, global chemicals management, classification and labeling. And under REACH, it's a specific information requirements at Annex 9. So when you go above 100 tons per year, manufacture or import. As already mentioned, the test itself involves testing on protected life stages of vertebrate animals. It's labor, resource, and animal intensive. So it typically takes around 1 to 3 months, depending on the species. So the biological phase of the test is 1 to 3 months, requires at least 360 fish, but very often greater than 700, depending on the design, which has to be adopted for the study. And it's quite a costly test as well. So, you know, the analysis and dosing, particularly for some really difficult to test substances like this substance, which is poorly soluble and the UVCB, would be another factor to consider. So, and yeah, finally, the focus or the endpoints, the outcome of this test is it's focused on apical endpoints. So it's looking at gross morphology, survival, hatching, and impacts on length of the fish exposed to the test substance. So specifically, what were the challenges that we had with C1215 alkyl benzoate? So I've already mentioned read across rejection. So in the initial dossier that was put in 2010, we had a read across approach where we were relying on old data from a branched C9 alkyl benzoate, but there was some information in Eka's view, and even in my view, that was able to substantiate that read across in a really robust way. And obviously the analog as well that we were selecting at the time was also chronically toxic to fish below the limit of solubility, but the target substance, our substance, is actually a lot less soluble. So there's some question marks about that. Yeah, both the target and the source substances, so our registered substance as well as the source substance, were not acutely toxic because they're so insoluble. So this removes any option to look at potential arguments around species sensitivity or acute to chronic ratios. And yeah, the other challenge we have is that ECHA tends to insist, and the REACH guidance tends to insist, that for really poorly soluble hydrophobic substances, chronic testing is the preferred way forward, because these typically take a lot longer to be taken up by aquatic organisms and reach steady state to cause, sublethal or chronic effects. However, despite all of these challenges, there was a glimmer of hope. So ECHA, in their compliance check decision, did leave a bit of an open-ended statement in which they said that there is the potential for us to run one chronic test on a species, so it could be on an invertebrate or a vertebrate, and use that to support the initial read across hypothesis. So a glimmer of hope, and that was what really triggered us to start developing our own strategy at the time around this glimmer of hope in the compliance check decision. So what we did in Innospec, and what I did, is I sat down and developed an internal strategy that we fleshed out and then decided to communicate with the consortium that we were present in at the time, because we were lead registrants and there are a number of other registrants within a consortium for this material. So the strategy in a nutshell was centered around avoiding the chronic fish test by executing new high quality water solubility studies, an algal growth inhibition test, and a long-term invertebrate or chronic Daphnia reproductive toxicity assay. So focused on building a battery of information that would basically help enhance the read across to other structurally analogous substances in this class of substances of benzoate esters. And then on that point, yeah, it was around 7 years after the initial registration deadlines for REACH. A lot of data may have been generated on some analog materials for our substance. So do a refresh lit review of the regulatory literature to see what's out there on other alkyl benzoate esters, to see if we can basically put something together that would establish trends and help enhance that read across. Aside from that, yeah, looking for new read across analogs as well. Like I say, 7 years is a long time, and companies may introduce new chemistries to the market that are similar to our chemistry. And that was quite fruitful, actually, because we did actually identify a new analog substance that was even more closely related to our substance than the old one, which we ascertained was not chronically toxic to fish. We were lucky we found it, and there was a chronic fish study on it. So that gave us some hope that we were going in the right direction. But then to build and expand upon all of this, yeah, we also looked to bolster the assessment by doing an in-depth review of the scientific literature, because I know from a previous life where I worked as an ecotoxicologist at Shell, that when you're dealing with very hydrophobic, poorly soluble substances, there is a phenomenon, at least with aquatic toxicity, where there's a cutoff. There is a point at which a substance becomes so insoluble, so non-bioavailable that it cannot be acutely or chronically toxic. So we expanded the lit review on that point as well. And then at the end of it all, we said we would document the entire approach, so the read across justification, additional lines of evidence, weight of evidence in an Annex 11. Sorry, there's a typo there. It should be Annex 11, weight of evidence-based adaptation under REACH. So the next couple of slides are a bit busy. I'll keep it high level. I won't go into the actual details, but basically this table summarizes what we found when we expanded the review to look at aquatic toxicity data for all the other alkyl benzoate esters that are structurally similar to our registered substance. So you don't have to focus on the numbers, but basically what you can see is I've ordered them from lowest molecular weight, most soluble, lowest log KOW right through to the most hydrophobic, highest molecular weight, which is our C1215 alkyl benzoate, which we call ester 7 in the table here. And the idea behind collating all the data in this way was that, yeah, like I said on the previous slide, it was to try and show or ascertain whether there was trends, breakpoints in the data. And what you can see here is the first few esters are obviously very, very low molecular weight, nowhere near close enough as analogs to the target substance, but still really useful because it shows that there is a trend across this group of substances. They're all the term non-polar narcotics. So we expect to see this. We expect to see this trend with these chemistries with non-specific modes of action. Ester 5 was the former read-across analog. So this is the ISO C9, and then the Ester 6 is the ISO C10 that we identified as a new read-across analog. And if I skip very quickly onto the next slide, the blue dashed line basically indicates, if you look at the block of acute data in the middle, yeah, you've got, solid EC LC50 values, but as soon as you get between Ester 3 and 4, that's a drop off where basically they become so insoluble that they're not acutely toxic. So that's good. But because our concern with the compliance check was regarding chronic toxicity, yeah, we really wanted to try and see if there was a break point in chronic tox as well. And what we actually found was that when we identified this additional Ester 6 analog, so an ISO C10 analog, yeah, hopefully what you can see there is that at least for the chronic fish endpoint, Ester 5, which was the original read-across analog, was chronically toxic to fish. But Ester 6, which is less soluble, closer to our target substance, was not chronically toxic to fish, invertebrates, or algae. So to strengthen the read-across approach, what we did is we obviously agreed with the consortium at the time that we would launch the new chronic invertebrate test, a new algae test, and all of this data basically matched up. So it showed that, the read across the trend was true. And yeah, we tried to push for, an approach which uses read across to this Ester 6 to avoid the chronic fish test on the registered substance. And this chart plot shows the data in a slightly different way. So you've got effect concentration on the y-axis and then alkyl chain length on the x-axis. And what you can see is as you go across the series, yeah, you've got solid blobs, which indicates toxicity at a certain effect level. And then any open circles is where you've basically got no toxicity at limit of solubility. And what you can see is for C9, the C9 alkyl benzoate ester, there's chronic toxicity to fish, but for the C10, no chronic toxicity to any aquatic organisms in the standard battery of reach tests. And then, yeah, the idea was that we extrapolate that read across from this new analog to our substance. Won't go into this in detail, but we also managed to pull several, literature papers on chronic toxicity behavior assessment of other hydrophobic materials like hydrocarbons and phthalate esters. And this also supported what we were seeing in this trend, that there is an apparent cutoff even for chronic aquatic toxicity for some of these substances. And it's all around bioavailability constraints and things like that. So what was the outcome of all of this? So on one hand, we had the Innospec strategy. We put all this information together. We went ahead with the chronic invertebrate, the algae test, and we were adamant that a new fish test was really not scientifically necessary. However, we had lengthy discussions within the consortium on this, and I put a picture in the middle there. The idea is that when you're in a consortium, you're all in the same boat. But on this particular issue, we were rowing in two completely different directions. So the consortium members were really fearful that ECHA would reject a further attempt to strengthen the read across approach. And they disagreed with our proposal and decided to go ahead and commission the chronic fish test. So because we were so adamant and stubborn, I guess, that we were right, we decided to resign from the consortium, drop our role as lead registrant of the material, and go our own direction using the legally permitted opt-out route under REACH. So just expanding a bit further on the outcome, the other registrants, obviously in early 2021 went ahead and they commissioned the fish ELS test, I must say, as a limit test. As expected from our point of view, that test ended up with no effects at limited solubility, no classification, and in a nutshell, yeah, the last resort principle, in our view, was not upheld by the other registrants. We, on the other hand, used read across to cover the fish ELS endpoint. Again, we draw the same conclusion based on read across, no effects at limited solubility. However, our approach is relying on weight of evidence and read across, and we believe that we have upheld the last resort principle for this particular substance on this particular endpoint. And the ultimate conclusion is that, yeah, regardless of the approach, we've converged at exactly the same point. So there's no difference in environmental classification, no difference in derivation of PNEC aquatic, and the substance is concluded to be safe for the aquatic environment. And where we are at the moment with this is, yeah, as of the 28th of March, today, we have had no follow-up decisions from either ECHA or the EU member state competent authorities on the opt-out dossier that we have submitted in conjunction to the other registrants, which have obviously not opted out and satisfied the information requirement with an actual test. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops. And then finally, yeah, just some concluding thoughts from me on this particular case study. As Carl mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, and Jay, you know, there's legal, commercial, and ethical reasons for us all involved in regulations like REACH to adhere to the last resort principle. You know, both the regulated and the regulator have clear obligations in this regard. Yeah, it's old news for those of you that are actively involved in REACH dossier development, but read across is obviously a really powerful tool to avoid animal testing, but we see very often now that high level, robust scientific justification is required. And yeah, there's a really high bar for acceptance on this. But it does beg the question that if you do fail once with it, why is there this reluctance to try again if the science is there for you to try again? Yeah, just my own personal points of view, but industry needs to appreciate that, yes, sometimes there's going to be disagreements, there's going to be different points of view, and we have to respect that. That was fairly evident with this particular substance in this case study. We do need to exploit all tools, methods available at our disposal to avoid animal testing, and we really do need to push harder for acceptance of methods like read across. And then, yeah, finally, this case study demonstrates the importance of exhausting absolutely all options before deciding to execute vertebrate testing. Maybe news to some, but yeah, there is a possibility under REACH, even with cases like this, for you to opt out. So if you've got fundamental disagreement on how a particular endpoint should be addressed, yeah, you have a right under REACH to opt out and use your own strategy and approach to deal with it. And yet, again, no news to everybody, but developing robust read across justifications often does require substantial time and effort. And yet, sometimes I guess this might be, you know, a cost that's factored in when companies decide, you know, is it worth the time and effort, or should we just go ahead, tick the box and run the study? So with that, I'll finish up my talk, hand over to Xiaoling. Yeah, another shameless plug here for the paper that we co-authored through the AFSA collaboration. Again, the QR code is up there and the hyperlink is in there, and I believe PDF copies of the slides from today's talk will be made available to you all after the webinar. So thanks very much. Over to you, Xiaoling.
Thanks, Jay. So I'll share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah. First, thanks, Jay and Carl, for setting the stage. So for those who do not know me, my name is Xiaoling Zhang. I'm a senior toxicologist at P&G. So today I will continue just talking about two other case studies we talked in our publications. Both this case studies are from the ECHA Board of Appeal cases. So for the first one is the Board of appeal case number A001 from 2014. Since it is just board appeal cases and publicly available, so I actually also provide the links below on this slide. If you want to get more details of this case, you can click the link and get the information. So for the first case, the substance has a very long name. I will not try to pronounce the full name out, but we just call it pigment orange 73. So this is to just give you some basic information about this substances. And this, as a pigment material, it is used in coating products, inks, toners, and polymers. The appellant is Cynic Chemicals back 2010 for the registration. So just want to point out here, in the current REACH dossier, you may see the registration tonnage band is 100 to 1,000 tons per year. But for this board appeal case at that time, this appellant just register the substance at 10 to 100 tons per year. Just because this case is related to a human safety endpoint, I just listed here the REACH data requirement on animal testing for human safety endpoint for both tonnage band and Annex 8 and 9. So for today, the mentioned tests are reproductive toxicity testing. For both tonnage band, there's a requirement for the screening study for reproductive and developmental toxicity as OECD 421 study. If there's some concerns observed from the screening study, then it might trigger an extended one generation reproductive toxicity study, which is the OECD 443. So please just keep these two studies in your mind. We will cover this in the later slides for this case. So this is just the timeline of the Board of Appeal. So I put the time in the middle because it's very critical for this case. So on the left, you can see the registrant actually submitted this registration of the substance back in July 2012. And in that registration dossier, they have a OECD 421 screening toxicity study. That study actually showed a degree of pup mortality. So because of this concern, the registrant, they proposed a testing proposal include an OECD 443 study to address this concern. Well, on January 7th, 2013, ECHA notified the appellant the draft decision just for requiring to conduct the proposed OECD 443. Also, March 8th, they notified this draft decision of the testing proposal to member state competent authorities. Right after that, this restaurant actually noticed that their study available from another registration dossier by other registrant. It also has a most recent and updated OECD 421 study. In that study, they use a different substrain of rats and different vehicle, and that study actually revealed no parental, reproductive, or developmental toxicity, even up to the limit dose, 1,000 milligram per kg per day. So, however, on October 15, 2013, when ECHA adopted the contact decision, they still state the requirement for doing the OECD 443, and they didn't take the new information, the new OECD 421 into consideration for their decision, final decision. Okay. So because of this, on January 15, 2014, the appellant just filed an appeal, and they claimed that ECHA breached the Article 25 requirement by requesting animal testing without consideration of the available information in the other dossiers. So I think Carl already mentioned this Article 25. I will not repeat, but just point out here so that they use this as a rationale to file the board appeal. And this is the BOE decision. In the BOE document, they state that the other restaurant screening test was considered as substantial new information, which could impact the need to carry out a new OECD 443. And they also found ACA's procedure in this respect were too rigid and led to the situation where the contest decision was adopted without taking into account of the new information prior to its adoption. And the failure could have resulted the unnecessary use of substantial number of animals and the associated cost. So just therefore, actually on June 10th, 2015, the BOE decision was made, which is in favor of the appellant. They annulled the previous decision and also ask for a reevaluation of the appellant's testing proposal. So here, just to show you the justification in this updated REACH dossier. So in accordance to Annex 9.8.7 of the REACH legislation, reproductive toxicity study do not need to be conducted if the substance have low toxicity, or there's no evidence of absorption from the TK study, or there's no significant human exposure. So the justification from the restaurants includes all three perspectives. First, they show the lack of toxicity of absorbance of this substance based on read across to a similar pigment, which has experimental data. And also they use this new OECD 421, the screening study for reproductive toxicity, to support there's no indication of systemic uptake. And finally, they mentioned there are no significant human exposure because the substances is handled as an inhalable dust only by industrial specialized person. And the pigment is incorporated into coatings at low concentrations. There's no significant exposure to the general population. Okay, so for the second case study, it's for Aziridine. The board appeal number is A002/2012. It is similar study, and Aziridine used as a monomer in polymerization process. So there's, for this particular substance, there's no consumer use, and the registration tonnage band is also 100 to 1,000 tons per year. For this case, the related testing is for environmental safety endpoint. So here just listed the REACH data requirement for animal testing for environmental safety endpoint. Per Annex 9 for 100 to 1,000 tonnage, there are three requirements for environmental safety endpoint testing on animals. One is the short-term toxicity on fish. The second one is the long-term aquatic toxicity on fish. And the third one is bioaccumulation in aquatic species. So for this particular case, it focuses on the long-term aquatic toxicity on fish, which I highlight here. Then under this Annex 9.1.6, there are three of the long-term aquatic toxicity on fish included. The first one, Jay already mentioned, is the fish early life stage, OECD 210. And besides that, there's one fish short-term toxicity study on embryo and sac fry stages, is OECD 212. And also there's a fish juvenile growth test. So just want to point out here, there's on the column 2, there's a special rules for adaptation from column 1. So what that means is if an exposure assessment or the RCRs, we often call the quantitative or qualitative risk characterization has shown that there's no risk to aquatic compartment. Just for example, the predicted environmental concentrations, the PEC, the ratio PEC to predicted no effect concentration, PNEC, if less than 1. Some of you may be also familiar the term RCR, less than 1. So that means there's no risk. So we can use this as an adaptation to waive the testing of the long-term aquatic toxicity on fish. So just keep this in mind because this will be covered in the later slide. So for this case, again, on August 9, 2010, the restaurant, they submit a registration dossier for the substance at 100 to 1,000 tons. And in that dossier, they actually include a testing proposal for an OECD 212 fish short-term toxicity study to cover the REACH data requirement. So this proposal was examined and initiated by ACA, and ACA on July 8th, 2011, they noticed the appellant their draft decision. Actually, ACA reject the testing proposal for OECD 212, but required to conduct an OECD 210. They consider the OECD 210 is more appropriate to cover this endpoint. So they also, on September 2nd, 2011, they notified this draft decision to the member state competent authorities. Also, same as the first case, the previous case, on December 2011, the registrant actually, they submit an updated dossier, which including argument to justify the waiving of the additional testing requirement. But when ACA adopt the contact decision on February 7th, 2012, they also didn't consider this updated information and still request for carry on long-term toxicity study on fish. So this just show again the justification from the restaurant. They maintain this OECD 210 test was unnecessary as there is no need to investigate further on the effect to aquatic organisms. Their justification is mainly based on what I have been mentioned previously, the RCR ratios. In the previous slides, I mentioned like a ratio below 1 is already indicated no risk. In this case, their calculated RCR ratios even below 0.1, although they already consider several worst case assumptions for the calculation. So therefore, they conclude the chemical safety assessment according to Annex 1 of the REACH regulation does not indicate a need for further testing. And they also claimed because they updated the registry dossier with the waiving statement, so the ACA decision based on the test proposal was no longer relevant because it's not even contained in this updated dossier. However, the agency, they subsequently informed that still any update of the dossier after the time of the draft decision has been sent to the member state competent authorities for comments, they cannot take them into account for the purpose of the decision. So therefore, on April 30th, 2012, the appellant just filed an appeal against this decision. On May 30th, 2012, so the executive director of ACA, he rectified this contact decision, I think, considering all this waiving justification document. So therefore, as a result, June 18th, 2012, the appellant, they withdraw their board appeal. And because the executive director of the agency rectified the contact decision, so the agency shall refund the appeal fee to the registrant. So here, just summary of learning from both cases. So from both cases, we identify some issues. The first one is the inflexible administrative process of the agency. This happened to both of the cases, like they didn't take any updated information into account for their final decision right after they submit the notify the draft decision to the member state competent authorities. So, and also for the first case, their existing testing data in another dossier, they tend to not accept that. So these examples shows also as just cases that animal testing has often been requested by either the member state or ACA as a default option, but not as a last resort. And also we can see how Board of Appeal functions as a gatekeeper upholding Article 25 when necessary. And on the other hand, also for the restaurant, I think their restaurant could undergo some thorough trainings on dossier preparation and submission to reduce this happening. For example, for the second case, if the restaurant submit the dossier at the beginning, include this waiving document, it can definitely avoid this happen. So I think that's all from me. So I just want to finally just thank all our co-authors for this manuscript, and of course my PNG co-authors, SP and Eleanor, and some special thanks to my colleagues from PNG, Harold, Catherine, and Raphael for their peer review to this publication. Yeah, thank you for your attention. I think we can go back to Q&A session.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Xiaoling, and thank you also to Carl and Jay. It was a really insightful webinar and gives a lot of insights into the paper. And I hope that if you haven't already, you will go and access the paper and digest it so that you can get a full idea of all of the case studies that were presented. We don't have a huge amount of time, and if you do have questions, like I say, pop them in the Q&A section. I just want to say at this time as well, if you are interested in the work that AFSA does and you want to join us, we are a true collaboration, and we really benefit from having diverse and passionate minds around the table and contributing to this work. So please, if you'd like to become a member, get in touch with me. And just as a bit of another advert, we'll be kind of extending our work in the regulatory accountability space beyond the last resort to focus on, examples of where testing has been requested when it's either difficult, impossible, or meaningless, or dim, as some people are wanting to say. So yeah, please do get in touch if you're interested in AFSA. I don't see any new questions in the Q&A box, so our presenters will get off very lightly today. But thanks so much for joining, for your attention, and thank you once again to our co-authors and presenters today. I hope you all have a very lovely day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.